in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, and I'm a Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Serena Townsend. She is the Chief People Officer at Silicon Labs. Serena, thank you so much for being here. If you can tell our audience a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, how did you address the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Hi, Christina. Thanks for having me. My name is Serena, and my pronouns are also she, her, hers. This question makes me laugh because I think I had about 17 answers by the time I landed in HR. So perhaps like many, many other children, I wanted to be a marine biologist for a really long time until I saw the movie Jaws, a little too young. So that changed my trajectory a little bit. But I think, I really landed in a lot of the humanities fields as I was going through college. I ended up with a psychology degree with a sociology minor, and really was going to go on a path to social work and thinking about getting my PhD in psychology, and kind of took a little bit of a left turn and ended up in recruiting and loved it, and didn't really set out to be in HR at the time, but certainly here I am today. So it was a really good fit for my background.
Yeah, absolutely. I always like to ask the question why and kind of reflect and understand your journey to the role, to Silicon Labs specifically, and really want to ask kind of how you think that your career path has really led you to lead the people team and function at Silicon Labs.
Yeah, a couple of again facets to that. One thing that you may not know about me, certainly by looking at me or meeting me for the first time, is that I grew up internationally for most of my life. And so I spent almost all of my childhood in the Middle East and in Europe and in Asia. And the reason I mention that is because I think it has led me to seek out companies with international teams. I love the diversity of that. I love the problem solving of that. And I'm really comfortable in those environments where, there's a lot of facets to the human experience, I guess. And I think the other piece of that too is just growing up in all of those different places and understanding that, there's a lot of difference in the way that we each solve problems and kind of go through life. I think being able to bring that human-centered lens into the workplace was really, really exciting. So just blending that international experience with my own kind of lens around humans and people have been really great foundational elements in getting me into HR and then into a leadership role as well.
Yeah, I think that human-centric approach is so important, especially right now as we're thinking about distributed work and for global companies, that are international. It's really important to have that perspective. And I know you mentioned that you were in recruiting and now you're leading the people team as well. How have you really seen kind of the people space change over the past, couple of years, especially over the past 18 plus months?
Yeah. When I reflect back, Christina, to how HR was, when I first started, there's a massive shift. I remember when I was in recruiting, I remember just thinking, gosh, I'm really going to stay in this for a long time because I don't want to be on the other side of the house where I'm kind of, developing policies and finding all the ways to say no. And it's so different than that now, right? And so I think just the concept of true business partnership and consultation and being able to add that unique lens of impact on our people and informing our decision making with how all the different ways that things will that we can influence people's outcomes, I think is a really important kind of piece of it. I think the other thing that I would add to, so that partnership model, I think is a really important thing. And I'm expected and I need to know deeply how the business functions, how teams interact, and I have to bring that to my job. And it's a really important part of it now. And it used to be, at least in my role and the way that I experienced HR, I think, and it makes it so much more exciting. And the problems are so much more complex, and that's great. I think the only other thing that I would add to that is the breadth of the work that we do on the HR side is now so much more diverse and vast. So what I'm thinking about particularly, especially in the last 18 months, there's no playbook for a lot of the stuff that we're doing today. I'm trying to figure out how to reimagine the workplace and figure out how to balance flexibility for our employees with how to build community and connection with each other, and how to handle our pandemic response, and then rolling in what to do with our initiatives around DEI and learning. And so just the scope of what we need to tackle from an employee experience lens has just quadrupled from when I really started in HR.
Absolutely. I'm sure there's never a boring day in your job. There's
There is not.
always something to do. And I think in these conversations too, a lot of people leaders are talking about how they've become this huge kind of strategic business partner over the past 18 months as well, and have a really large seat at the table, and everyone's asking them to kind of solve anything and everything. I also wanted to ask too, as a company who continues to kind of grow and onboard new members of the team, how are you thinking about kind of scaling company culture at Silicon Labs? And also, I know you've been there for a couple of years now, so any changes you've seen in company culture there?
Yes. So I think, let me back up a little bit, because I've thought a lot about the term culture, I guess. And there's really fundamental programs and initiatives that we're driving, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But one of the things that's just important for me as my North Star is, culture is really about the hundreds of decisions that I make every day and how I interact with people as a leader, as a team member. And so I think all of those combine together, right, to create the culture of that we are our intentional culture, I think, at Silicon Labs. And I think most importantly for the last 18 months, you're really tested on that when things are tough and challenging. And not perfect, but I really try to keep that North Star on just the fundamentals of respect and empathy and trust and compassion, and what's the right thing to do in this particular case, which is one of our core values actually at Silicon Labs, is do the right thing. So just fundamentally trying to ground myself in that before we make decisions on programmatic changes is just an important concept for me and my perspective. We have definitely widened our focus, I think, on how we think about supporting our employees. So specifically, there's such a great need for thinking about how to improve and protect people's wellness. Mm-hmm. So their physical safety, is now part of the conversation with COVID, right? And then their mental and emotional health, and how we help people balance all of the things that are coming at them. So from a culture perspective, we're also looking at, making sure that people have the flexibility that they need, and that we can adapt and personalize the approach as we go, depending on what people need from us in order to support them. And then, some of the more maybe traditional programs around, the way that we kind of support our employee needs from a community building perspective. We've introduced quite a few new employee resource groups, which are really important community builders and places of connection for folks. So kind of a variety of things. And I think the main point is, how do you step back and look holistically on the employee experience, and what would be really good targeted interventions to make sure that every person feels supported, at least as best we can. And that has meant really different things in the last 18 months for sure.
Absolutely. There are a million things that you can do. And I think that holistic strategy is really important, especially for the employee experience, because everybody is different. We're humans, we're complicated. And it's really finding that common thread and supporting. And one of the kind of things that you mentioned too is this conversation around mental health, which a lot of companies are talking about, which is really important as well. What are some of kind of the tools that kind of you use to support the mental well-being of your team?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think about that a lot as well. One thing that we've been spending a lot of focus on is just normalizing the conversation, frankly, just really taking the opportunity in our town halls, providing managers with kind of tools and resources on, what to do when they see someone withdrawing, or how to handle a situation that is, that someone is really struggling personally. And I think just really being able to talk about it often, talk about it in a way that is supportive to our employees, to where, just one more person is comfortable coming forward to say, I'm struggling in this way and I need additional support, and that being okay, So that's really the big focus of what I've been personally trying to do, and that we've been driving at the company. And then some of the things that we've been rolling out, I mentioned our ERG. We've got one called Bean at Silicon Lab. I'm thrilled about, and so it's really focused on wellness and this whole concept of how do we best support our employees just holistically as they go through this unprecedented amount of change and stress. And you could add 17 things to that list. We're all handling a lot. So that's been a really important component. I'm thrilled about that. And then we've just come from some benefits design meetings where we're looking at what new programs and benefits and policies can we add in so that people have easier access to mental health support and providers and things like that. So I think just being able to tackle that again in a number of ways, depending, so that you are able to touch the most amount of people with it is what we've been focused on, Christina.
Yeah, I think that's important too, because not everybody is going to use the same resources, be involved in every employee resource group, but someone will be. And it's important to meet folks where they are as well and have all those strategies in place. Normalizing the conversation around mental health, asking how someone is, and really, waiting for their response as well. You can tell when someone is being genuine there or not. And I think what we're talking about too is kind of building this workplace of trust and kind of psychological safety. And one of the other kind of questions that I had for you is how you see this culture of employee listening and trust really kind of manifesting at Silicon Labs.
Yeah, I guess the way that I'd respond to that, when I think back to the early days of the pandemic, one of the guiding principles for all of us was just this concept of flexibility, right? We don't know what we are going to need from one week to the other. It's just been so drastically different as new information comes at us. So how can we provide flexibility for our employees? We can adapt and personalize our approach. I know I mentioned that earlier, but what it kind of translated to was we're going to immediately move as best we can to a remote virtual work environment and put the trust into our empower our employees, to work in the ways that match their needs at the time. So that was a huge pivot for our organization and many, many others, right? But the central concept was, you've got a lot that you're dealing with. We are here to support you. We're going to give you the tools and the information and the support as best we can. We're going to accommodate for you personally as best we can, because we know that, again, your situation is going to change and you can't even anticipate, much less articulate what you might need. So kind of gone were the days of we're going to create a bunch of policies around it. It was really more that, okay, how do we create or adjust our culture so that we are really meeting people where they're at and being able to iterate and adapt as we go, and really saying that's okay, employees, to do that. And that's okay, managers, for you to give a whole bunch of latitude where, sometimes people are looking for, the box and the, specific swim lanes, and there's just none to be had right now. So I think that's the way that we approached it. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it definitely answers my question. And I think your approach definitely makes sense in terms of flexibility and listening to employees and being dynamic instead of static in your strategy, and being open to feedback. A lot of leaders are talking about how business as usual. And you mentioned there's no playbook for everything that we're experiencing right now. So there is so much room for innovation and to be creative and just to try and test new strategies, which sounds like you're doing as well. I wanted to ask too how you're kind of implementing innovative processes at Silicon Labs, and if you could provide any kind of examples that folks can kind of like take with them to their organizations too that you've found successful.
Yeah, I'm excited about this question. I think, we all have an opportunity to innovate in our roles. I think especially on the people team. And it reminds me, I guess, Christina, we have at Silicon Labs, we have an event every year called the Tech Symposium. And it's really a chance for primarily, our engineering teams to come together and really highlight some of the innovative work that they've done on our products and our processes and things like that. And about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we had our first HR entry ever. And I think the reason I mention that is because, it's so important to think about your job just like an engineer would, right? And how can I bring some creative new thinking to the team and to the job that I do? And so the project that we had kind of highlighted was using design thinking and kind of agile processes to revamp and redesign our university recruiting strategy. And so the core point was there are so many best practices that are happening in our software teams and across our organization. All of those same concepts can apply just the same, right, to our people processes. And so how can we really rethink the way that we do our work and we support our customers? So we've done a lot of really interesting new work and led by someone on my team. Her name's Sam Wiseman, and she's just been an amazing force of nature around implementing agile HR, really working in sprints so that we've got this tempo and cadence to the job that we do, and we can estimate our work just like a software team can, not just, but kind of around the same path. And again, really bringing those design thinking concepts to making sure that we are designing and delivering programs that matter for people and it really fits our global footprint.
Yeah, I think design thinking and inclusive design is a huge opportunity to really make sure that the processes that people are creating and iterating on are really inclusive, and you're bringing everyone into the conversation and again pushing that innovation forward. And it could be a fun opportunity to collaborate with your team members and with other folks in different partners as well, similar to an engineering team, as you mentioned. I know there are a lot of different kind of initiatives and kind of problems to tackle as well. And we've talked about a couple of them here today, but are there any other kind of, in terms of current state, the next problem or situation that's taking up the most brain space in your mind right now?
Yes. Me and every other HR professional, I'm sure. It's really the area around kind of back to work. And you see that as hybrid work policy, flexible work policy. There's so many buzzwords out there. And nobody knows what how this will all play out. I think we're all trying to read the tea leaves and really think about what mix of synchronous and asynchronous work is best for teams. And I don't know that anyone has the answer to that. Everyone has opinions, certainly, but no one really has the answer to that. So spending a lot of time with our business team members, just across the organization, really getting input from our employees on what's working for them and what's not, thinking about how to apply that after it's safe to return to the office. And things that might appear simple on paper, even kind of those high level design decisions become incredibly complex when you're applying those to a global organization with 19 locations and very different norms and employment law and things like that. So it's been really interesting to work on it. And I have a really great kind of HR network and roundtable that I'm a part of. And we spend a lot of time just thinking through what are those shared workspaces look like? What do you use conference rooms for anymore? It's not really to do work anymore. It's really to build community. And so we just kind of turning everything on its head and anticipating what that might look like is pretty challenging. So that and just ensuring that we are keeping safety and health our top priority across the globe. And we've got a whole bunch of people who are doing an amazing job as kind of site health teams, reacting and adapting to the local guidance and making sure our essential workers are protected. So those two things are part of my everyday job for sure right now, on top of other day-to-day stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good that you kind of mentioned the community of leaders and kind of HR professionals also that you kind of have as well. I think the power of just leaning on each other. And I think a lot of executives talk about this too, just feeling like they're on an island on themselves. So I think sharing those best practices and having a conversation around it is really important. On the flip side as well, instead of kind of the biggest problem to solve, what is something that you're seeing in the industry that you're really excited by in terms of a positive trend that you see people leaders really implementing in their strategy, or something you're hopeful around?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to touch on this a little bit and then come up with something new too. But I think the workplace trends are also an incredible opportunity. I just think there's so much ability for us to rethink workplace norms, the way that work is done, how that translates to culture and the impact on so many different things. So I see that as a huge opportunity that's going to be years and years in the making. And at this point, fast forward, we'll have all kinds of articles and white papers written about this period of time for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other opportunity, at least for in my world, is we are going through a tremendous amount of organizational change. And when I think about, combine that with what people are dealing with in the world today, there's no shortage of crises, that we're all kind of having to handle. And then just knowing that the ability to adapt is really a fundamental piece of how we're all going to be successful. I don't know if you saw it, there was an interesting McKinsey article that came out recently about adaptability. And I've been thinking a lot about that and how that applies to organizations and how we build resilience. So I think my overall point is this concept of change management isn't a one and done situation, right? We have to figure out how to build teams and organizations and equip individuals with the ability and the toolbox to tackle new problems and come out successfully on the other side, not totally burnt to a crisp, right? And I don't have the answer for it, but I spend a lot of time thinking about that as far as the opportunity that I have to lead through that our leadership team has to equip people to be successful at that. And I think that's a really interesting part that employers will play moving into kind of this next stage.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree that adaptability is it's an important skill that you need to kind of have the proactive mindset to have and also be kind of reactive with as well in order to implement that skill and practice it in strategies and in conversations too. And I think leaders also, especially people managers, need to be adaptable from your kind of perspective, even with the changing role of people leaders, to kind of have all kinds of conversations with their teams over the past year. How do you think about kind of measuring the effectiveness of people leaders and kind of being adaptable, having those conversations in kind of a qualitative or quantitative way?
Measuring the effectiveness of leadership
Yeah.
to do that? That's a good question. I guess historically we've kind of measured outcomes, right? And kind of typical things like engagement scores and retention and that type of thing. And I think those things are important markers. I think that they are poor proxies also, right? I think there's just so much under the covers when you look at kind of aggregate engagement scores and things like that. So I think one of the things that's important to recognize if we're thinking about how effective we are at kind of leading people through that change is really being able to talk with our employees about their experiences. And also the way that we measure should be a little bit different. So one of the things that we're doing is looking at different assessments. So for example, we are partnering with a company called Canaries, who are wonderful. And we've been looking at like an inclusion index, right? So how do people feel about their sense of belonging at Silicon Labs, right? Are we doing all the things that will impact employees in a way where they feel like they're being supported and their voice is heard and they have a seat at the table and all of those pieces? So I guess my point is there's new and innovative thinking on the questions we're asking and why these metrics are important and what we should throw out as kind of a check in the box, and we're really not getting the information we really want to be getting on employees. And so thinking about what tools and metrics we should be transitioning to in order to do that. So we're kind of in the midst of exploring and doing some testing on our end too, to try to understand what that kind of new set of qualitative and quantitative measurement should be.
Absolutely. There are a lot of tools that you can use. And also, if you want to know if people feel like they are supported and included, that you have to do exactly what you said. You have to ask them. You have to ask them the specific questions and really have that level of trust to kind of get that feedback and then kind of act on it as well. It's a very dynamic process. Again, not a one and done, check the box. People are included. We don't have to work on it anymore as well. One of the other kind of questions I had for you too is I'm sure you have many of these throughout your career and at Silicon Labs specifically, but is there a kind of proudest moment where you were in that either moment of flow or it was a kind of large or small everyday thing where you were just thinking, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be right now?
I had mentioned earlier, and just to be totally honest, that the tech symposium, that I mentioned as kind of we were able to highlight some of the ways that we were innovative. And that was a really significant moment for me. I think when I reflect back on why, certainly I was proud of the team. So I was proud of the team that they challenged themselves to identify as a team worthy of that tech symposium and worthy of being judged on our innovation and having that seat at the table equally. And that was amazing to see people, who, including me, were intimidated by that and really able to kind of get to the other side of it and really be proud of the work and demonstrate that. And that was awesome. And I think the central theme for me in general, as just what drives me as a person, is kind of being in the trend, or working kind of shoulder to shoulder, right, with people that you admire and respect. And it's really, really hard. And then being able to get to the other side of that and look back and think, wow, that's a really significant achievement. And I'm really, really excited about that. So that was a really proud moment for me, because I was so proud of the team and what I knew was such a mental challenge. I knew the work was good, but that mental challenge of, I belong here and in this space, and my job is worthy and it's equal, was awesome. I'll never forget that.
I think that's great. It's a really good example of what you said in terms of, the team thinking, I belong here, my ideas are worthy, and I feel supported enough to share with the team as well. And pitch it. So I love that answer.
Thanks.
I know we kind of talked a little bit about this too, but how would you kind of fill in the blank of, in order for people leaders and organizations to be successful in the future, they must have blank?
I'm trying to edit myself for the 5 words that come to mind. For me, the empathy certainly is a cornerstone for me. That is basic humanity to me, frankly. And then I think in the role that I play, and in any leadership role, I think it's a necessity to be able to stand in someone else's shoes and think about how this program or my words or this org decision is going to impact that person, and to be able to sometimes adjust the decision, but oftentimes it's adjust the messaging and how you manage change and some of the downstream pieces that you need to put into effect. So I think that level of or just recognizing that the personal experience behind your team members is going to be super critical for you to understand and at least be sensitive to moving forward. That's a pretty key ingredient. And not to keep putting words in there, but I do think the adaptability piece is incredibly important, especially with the way that the world is changing. You have to throw out, to me, you have to throw out your concepts of, I do things in this way, and that's really worked for me. And I think that's awesome, but the world is changing and you have to pattern match in a different way. And you have to be open to the possibility that your plan A isn't going to be a fit anymore, and moving to plan B, and having the vulnerability maybe to ask for help and to seek other opinions and to adjust. And, sometimes say that my first response wasn't right and we're going to try things a different way. So I know I'm giving you 2 answers, but I couldn't pick.
No,
Those are 2.
Empathy and adaptability are important. And I think both relate to that self-awareness piece, the reflection. And I think when we're talking more granularly around company culture, it's really important to do that internal work and kind of be aware, lead with kind of that humbleness. And it's impossible for everybody to know all of the answers and not ask for help. Nobody's an island. So like both answers to that. Is there anything, Serena, that I either didn't ask you that you want to share with kind of the audience members who are listening, or maybe 1 to 2 key takeaways you hope that they bring with them after listening to our conversation today?
Sure. My brain kind of goes 2 different directions. And so if you'll humor me for 2 things, one is, I get asked fairly regularly on kind of what was my path, to this role. And my honest answer is it was not linear, and it can look very eclectic on paper. And so I was in IT for 5 years. I was in recruiting. I was in program management. I was in HR BP world. And I'm not saying that it was like a very clear roadmap in my mind at all times, but I went to where I was very curious. I had a lot of interest and where I could add value, and just having the faith that I would figure out the next step as I went, and the amazing part is now where, where I am today, I use those components so much that, that kind of where someone could think of that as a detour into IT, understanding how systems are built and how data flows is incredibly important to my role. So I think just the trust your instincts on finding where you add value and where you want to solve interesting problems, and that it's all beneficial in the end. And then I think just the other thing that comes to mind, when we're talking, Christina, about resilience and kind of adaptability, I have one kind of very strong visual in my mind. And just to back up a little bit, about 3 years ago, I went on a bucket list trip to climb Mount Kilimanjaro.
Oh, wow.
And it was, I know, it was amazing. And I could talk about it with you forever. And I know you love to travel. Here's the most surprising part of it. It's incredibly physical and it's very, very hard. And, you're on this, you summit the mountain at night and it takes you 10 hours, trudging in this crazy hard conditions. And, I can tell you a lot about the climb and the physicality of it. And there's so many kind of, really interesting and beautiful moments. But the one overriding thing that I will remember forever is just the humanity of it and the giving, the back and forth giving and receiving of support. And the reason I've been thinking about that trip a lot, and particularly that night, is because that's how I feel a lot of the times going through this pandemic and just all of the challenging things that are coming at us in the world today. And when you work beside these people, or all your relationships, there are these moments where you have to be the giver and then you have to be the receiver in equal parts. And you sometimes don't know, when that's going to be. And on that climb up the mountain, it was comical how one moment in your mind, you're like, I'm amazing. I did no problem. And then like literally 7 minutes later, I was like crying, laying on the ground, like I can't go any further. And the mental game of it is just, it's unbelievable. And I think, obviously nobody's climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, or maybe they are, and good luck to them. But there's a parallel to that, right? We're all struggling in some way with processing what's going on in the world. And number one, you just have to really be open to that, the support aspect of it, and that you really don't know, when your time of need is going to come. And so, give other people grace when they need it and give yourself grace when you need it. And it's just a really symbiotic relationship with that. So I've been thinking about that a lot as a parallel to my role today, and just how to go through life as a parent and a spouse and a mom and a daughter and all the roles that we play, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A full life. Well, that's an incredible accomplishment. That's amazing. And definitely
Thank you.
parallels and resilience. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Serena, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture. I really appreciated our conversation this afternoon.
Thanks, Christine. It was really nice to meet you.
Yeah, it was nice to meet you. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, AllVoices, we believe in employee feedback management, and that all that feedback is really important for the company to succeed as a whole. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.